Good morning, everyone. Happy Monday morning. I'm Elise with the United Way of Snohomish County. And we have Sylvia Chuey here with us from the Tamarack Institute. So this is webinar 3. Today we're covering practicing authentic community engagement. So really trying to think very on a practical and applied level, and also out of the box on, what does true and helpful community engagement look like. So we have this webinar, and then we'll have one more, and then we'll head into another deep dive session for folks who are on kind of the core teams of collaboratives to dig deeper into these topics. So with that, I will turn it on over to you, Sylvia.
Thank you. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yep.
Good. Well, I am just now switching over to my phone audio.
In the meeting.
Oh.
There you go. Can you all hear me well? Good.
Yes.
I'm switching over just because I find it creates less grief if I can do that. All right. Well, I am absolutely thrilled to spend time with you today to talk about what for me is an all-time favorite of my topics, which is how do you practice authentic community engagement? And so my hope is to sort of give you some framing to think about this, and then give you an exercise or a chance to experience a tool that we often use with planning teams as they're thinking about how to go about engagement, or they're thinking about the design of any initiative. And I think it'll be a really interesting exercise. For me, I think I always love to start by grounding our virtual meeting in the land on which each and every one of us is rooted. And for me, living in Caledon, Ontario, Canada, I live in the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and the Métis of the Credit River. And I am thrilled to be with you and believe that a lot of the wisdom that we have is rooted in some of these traditions and can easily get lost and overlooked. So it's an invitation to invite that knowing into our work as well. And if you know the traditional lands that you are rooted in, I'd encourage you to just put that in the chat box. You've seen this before, but this is just a reminder to reach out to me if you have questions after our session and want to follow up and learn more. But here's what I'd like us to do to kind of get warmed up to the topic of authentic engagement. I want you to just reflect back over your entire lifetime and think of a time when you felt deeply, deeply engaged. You got invited in to be part of something, and it really spoke to you and really sparked you. And then think about what it was about that experience that really helped to engage you. And if you could, put some of those thoughts and ideas into the chat box. I'm seeing lots of lovely stuff being popped in by you folks. Thank you so much. I think the reason that I have asked this as the anchor question before we dive into the content of this webinar is just to remind us all that we all know what works in terms of engagement often, right? Based on our own experience. And if you are hoping to engage a group who you feel might be culturally or experientially different from your own lived experience, I'd really encourage you to open up with that kind of a question, because it's helpful to know what people need. It gives you a real insight into the ways in which we are alike and or the things that we individually or collectively might need to be able to say yes when an invitation to engage comes forward. You've seen this before. This is our 5 interconnected practices of community change that anchor the work of Tamarack's Learning Center. And for us, while collective impact may be the most powerful, the authentic community engagement is the most important, because we need both the wisdom of a content expert, a subject matter expert, but equally important, we need the wisdom that only someone with the lived experience of the issue in your geography can bring to helping to shape and define a high impact, collective impact strategy. Does that make sense? So being really intentional about how we engage is a really important consideration to the design of your work. The other thing I love, and this comes from one of my all-time colleagues who I respect deeply, at Tamarack, we've really thought about authentic engagement as a process of co-creation in partnership with the people who know best because of their own lived experiences. And one of the things I remember from a mentor of mine, he reminds me that, you know, ingenuity and willingness to kind of problem solve isn't a special gift that only some of us have. It is something that we are all capable of and often quite passionate about being included in. But the paradox for those of you who are kind of leading community efforts around engagement is that while internet and social media have certainly made it easier, I think, in some ways, for us to mobilize support and or get messages out to people, the complexity of issues, scarcity of funding, shrinking public attention, and I would say also the pandemic has really at the same time made the challenge of engaging community and finding and uniting change makers more difficult than ever. So it's kind of a paradox. People are eager, they're hungry, they want it, and we have, through the internet, tools and resources that previous generations of mobilizers would have cried to have. It's the environment is challenging. But what we do know, beyond whatever you engage people around, that studies absolutely show people who choose to be engaged or are encouraged to participate actually have tremendous benefit to themselves personally. In fact, you know, there's a study from Harvard that showed not only that the higher a community's social capital or the level of connection between them, the lower its mortality rates, both from violent crime and also from heart disease. So the truth is, as a species, we're really hardwired to connect with one another, and yet the traditional ways in which community connected have been evolving and shifting and changing. And as a result, individual people's experience and opportunity to engage has been declined steadily. And I find this really fascinating. Here in Canada, there's been a real good look at this concept of social inclusion and the flip side, social isolation. And they've actually found our public health people talk about loneliness as the new tobacco. And the reason that they say that is that the impact on your own personal physical health of being isolated and alone is the equivalent of smoking 15 cigarettes a day. As you see, it can be twice as deadly as obesity, and it has been shown to increase an individual's risk of dementia by 64%. So We also know beyond the individual level, at the neighborhood level, particularly in times of emergency, like a wildfire, for example, neighbors and neighborhoods that know one another fare much better. And people who feel a sense of belonging and connection to their community are much more likely to act in the common good. But at the same time, a deliberate and intentional effort is absolutely needed if we are going to try and relearn and re-engage our community. Interestingly, Jane Jacobs did a fascinating study looking at the heat waves in two identical neighborhoods in Chicago in the early 90s. And what was fascinating to researchers was these two neighborhoods were literally side by side and had roughly the same socioeconomic demographic of lower income. But in terms of how they fared, their experiences were night and day. And at the end of the research project, the researchers, one of the few things that they could identify as the distinguishing factor of the neighborhood that did well from the neighborhood that didn't, was that the neighborhood that did well had front porches. Isn't that fascinating? And the neighborhood that didn't fare as well during the heat wave was designed so that you drove your car into your garage, you closed the garage door, and you walked from inside your garage to the house. And the reason that that was important is that people who had front porches informally got a sense of who else was in the neighborhood. So when the heat wave hit, they knew where the new parents were that might need help with, keeping their young baby cool and safe, or who are the elderly people that don't have connection that we should probably check on and help get to the cool-off center, right? Fascinating stuff. And I saw someone just posted about, yes, the UK has just named a Minister of Loneliness, which I think is fascinating. I wish they'd called him the Minister of Connection. What's really interesting is that in Canada, anyway, our community foundations have done some groundbreaking research around belonging. And one of the things that's fascinating is, as you see, a significantly high percentage of folks in Canada don't feel like they have a stake in their local community. And why that matters is because they've actually made a very clear connection. When people don't feel they belong, that's the precursor. Before they'll volunteer, before they will get involved in the life of the community, they have to have that sense of belonging. And in fact, back in 2014, our Stats Canada data was showing that 1 in 5 older Canadians describe themselves as lonely or dissatisfied with life, and that alarmed people, but it wasn't surprising. What absolutely did catch people's attention, however, was at the same time, 64% of post-secondary school students were reported feeling very lonely at least once in the last 12 months. Now, this is all pre-pandemic, and I'd be fascinated to sort of see how that kind of plays out now. And much like the UK, our Chief Medical Officer of Health actually chose to focus his 2019 report on the impact of loneliness and social isolation, and why, in fact, it was so critically important that all sectors of the community be thinking about this as an issue to address. Because the flip side, why we want a sense of connection and engagement is it's critical for community leadership as well. I love this guy because he's like me, this perpetual optimist. He can't save the world by himself, he's learned that, but with 3 other people, he can take it on. But in fact, all joking aside, the respected consulting firm McKinsey and Company found in '94, when they were doing work on revitalizing rural communities in Australia, that given the choice between giving a rural region $50 million to revitalize itself or $2 million with 20 committed local leaders, they would choose the 2 and 20 every single time in terms of likelihood of having a positive impact. So we can't underestimate the critical work that you all are doing when you're building relationships and connections at the local level in your communities. In fact, the same kind of finding was echoed more recently by the Boston Federal Reserve Bank when they started looking in 2018. They went and looked at a number of mid-sized cities across the U.S. that had been equally devastated by the global downturn, predominantly because they were manufacturing-based communities that had taken a real economic hit. A decade later, what they were seeing is a subset of those communities were resurging, and another group who had endured the same hardship were kind of stagnating, and they wanted to understand what was the difference between those communities that had been able to resurge over a decade and those that were stuck. And they could only find these three things. One, that in the cities that were resurging, leadership and multi-sector collaboration were common characteristics, that the leaders of those communities, in essence, gave up waiting to be rescued from away and really came to understand that it was their job, and if they didn't take on and find a way to work together to revitalize their community, nobody would. And in fact, they began to take responsibility individually and collectively to chart a path to make that happen. The other critical element that I think shapes and underscores why and how community engagement is such an essential part of any change effort is that each and every one of us comes to this work of community change with our own biases and assumptions about what's in the scope of what we're working on, what's out of scope, you know, what some of the problems might be. And we have our own relationships and connections, and we have a sense of power dynamics. But we will never get out of the same old way of thinking and acting unless we are kind of challenged in the way that we've thought about things and invited through the wisdom and insights of people whose perspective is quite different from our own to view the problem in a new way. The other thing that I think is really critical is how important the role of trust is in change generally. And what we see in this graphic here shows you quite clearly across 4 countries that the more engaged and informed an individual is, the more trust they have about the actions and motivations of an organization. So the more you effectively engage and inform the community that you want to work with and support, the more you will be trusted and your insights will be trusted and respected. So good to know. We at Tamarack look at engagement on a continuum. So what you'll see when I say engagement and you say engagement, we could mean very different things. And in fact, this is important because trust in a community engagement process often breaks down when there's a gap between the level of engagement or the type of engagement that folks want and what they are offered. So informing is that simple, you know, I come to you from outside the community, I host a community meeting, and I tell you what's going to happen or what is happening. Consulting is me meeting from outside the community, me coming in and kind of engaging people in the community and basically saying, so there is this issue, we can fix it using option A, option B, or option C. Which one would you think would work best and why? It's a little bit more open. Involving is getting to conversations with stakeholders and members of the community in a very different way. You are bringing the issue or the problem, not the solution, and you're engaging them in generating ideas and possibilities for action. Collaboration is really coming in with that same sort of partnership and sharing with community, not just on identifying the problem, but also signaling a desire and an interest in working together and alongside community in resolving the issue. And the last element of the engagement continuum, which is really interesting, because I think it's the one I personally tend to overlook most, is standing still within a community before I enter and making note of what's already happening in the community and what are people caring about in that community, and then moving in to ask about how can we support and amplify the work that is already underway. I think as someone thinking about engagement, it's important to recognize that each one of these options has different levels of complexity or timeline and has impact on budget as well as community expectations. And so really, internally, before you ever go out to community, getting alignment within your own organization or network about the level of engagement that you're hoping to achieve, and ensuring that you have allocated resources to enable you to support that and that it's reflected in your timeline is something that's really critical and important. But ultimately, for me, I think it's really about shifting the mindset. So one of the best papers I ever read, and I'm going to reference it a little bit later so you'll be able to find it, was written by a retired city manager. And he talked about this thing called vending machine government. And what he meant by that was he said, when the public sector, when government unintentionally kind of grabbed onto the concept of exemplary customer service and imported it in from the business sector, one of the unintended consequences is that they ended up reinforcing to citizens that they were voters and taxpayers, but forgot to really emphasize the role of the citizen as responsible for co-creating the kind of community that he or she wanted to be part of. And so what ended up happening is he said staff at the city were getting inundated because people would come in and basically say, you know, I paid my $5 of taxes, cha-ching, why aren't you picking up my trash? And the next person would come in, I've paid my $5 of taxes, why haven't you fixed the pothole in front of my house? And the staff were running pillar to post, reacting. And so really part of this work of good engagement is shifting the perspective of a resident from being a recipient of service or a source of information solely to really beginning to explore how can they be a participant and co-creator and ultimately a leader in part of the change process to make the community better. But in order for citizens to make that mindset shift, organizations who are often the hosts and initiators of an engagement effort also have to really think differently and move away from solely seeing it as their job to do the fixing of whatever the issue is, to really seeing your role much more as a catalyst and co-facilitator for the kinds of changes that the community sees as being essential and needed. So remember, we've talked about in collective impact the importance of uniting both the content and the context experts and why they both bring critical elements of knowledge that need to be woven together to actually design a high impact community change strategy. And that means moving, you know, obviously from simply buying in the solution that service delivery agencies are proposing to community to fix issues to really shifting who owns that problem and how you fix it. This is the paper written by the retired city manager that I was speaking about, community building, how to do it and why it matters. And I love how he has outlined here how your stance shifts and changes. When you're a single sector problem solving stance and you think it's your job, your emphasis is on solving problems. When you move to more of a collective impact style approach with diverse players around the table, it's really about envisioning possibilities, right? It's really not about focusing on people's needs and gaps and deficiencies, but really looking and making sure that we're honoring and tapping into and mobilizing people's gifts, their knowledge, their skills, and their abilities. And what I love is he's taken this thinking a bit further. He says what really happens, the critical shift around engagement from an organizational lens, is to stop seeing your organization necessarily as the lead responsible for fixing the issue and make a slight tweak by putting the issue or topic itself into the center. So you become a host of a dialogue, and you are collaborating alongside many partners to explore how you resolve an issue and or champion an opportunity, as opposed to eliciting input from people, but then the 100% of the weight of the responsibility to fulfill still lives within the organization. And 4 ways that he's identified quite powerfully to make this shift are to really start by thinking about, could you just be a consciousness raiser? Could you host a speaker series? There's one really incredible initiative in Allentown, Pennsylvania that has, it's called Leadership Without Limits, and it's a leadership training initiative for residents from a low-income neighborhood. And one of the key design features that I loved is that one of the responsibilities in this leadership program is 4 times a year, the people who are in the leadership training are responsible for hosting a community meeting. And they're given a budget to go out and find someone who looks and whose life experience is very like the people of the neighborhood, but they've managed to accomplish great things. And they can bring them to the community and host a community dinner where people can see and learn that there are people just like them who are making incredible things happen everywhere. You can be a convener, so you can host the meeting and you can, support bringing people together either virtually or in real time as our health situation allows, to really kind of gather people's ideas and just get to know and meet one another. You can be a catalyst. So you can start one initiative that is sort of a spark or a kickstart to a much broader change. Or you can be a facilitator. So you have skill where you can be neutral, and you can, just as you're hosting the meeting, you can also help to design and guide the meeting so that it builds relationships, knowledge, and shared understanding between and amongst people. I don't know how many of you are familiar with asset-based community development, but it's a very specific approach developed by the guy you see in the picture there with me, a fellow by the name of John McKnight, who's close to 90 now. He is an American national treasure, lives just outside Chicago, and his work in low-income neighborhoods in the 1960s was revolutionary and instrumental in him identifying and building out this practice of asset-based community development, which begins with the question in the neighborhood, not what do people need and what's broken, but a real intentional effort to focus on what's working and how do we build more on what's working. And one of the things that he suggests in his approach, which I adore, is when people have brainstormed lots of ideas about what's possible and what they'd love to see happen in their neighborhood, before diving into action planning, he asks people to break the ideas or possibilities into 3 buckets. The first is, what are things that people of this neighborhood, between and amongst them with their skills and knowledge, are able to do for themselves? And what are they going to do, right? What can they do? What do the people of this neighborhood want to see happen? They have some of the resource that they need, i.e. we want to, revitalize the park at the end of our street, but we need approval from the city, and maybe they will waive whatever the building permits are to enable a group of volunteers to come out and clean up and revitalize the parks, right? And then lastly, what are things that we as a group of residents really deeply care about, but actually don't have the resources or the influence to be able to affect for ourselves? That list begins to sort of outline, which for me would be maybe the advocacy or policy change agenda that the residents of the neighborhood might want to be thinking about. So really helpful to break apart very practically all these hopes and ideas into things we can do for ourselves, things we can do but need help from outside our community to get done, and things that are beyond our sphere of influence, but we still care deeply enough about them that we want to act on them in some way. All right, so one of the things that I think is also really critical coming from the work of John McKnight is really taking the time to differentiate that what a group of neighbors and residents can do together is quite different from what an organization can accomplish. And you'll see from the graphic there, he talks about the organizations as being like a hammer and the citizen neighborhood network as being a little bit like a saw. We need both on the job site, but we wouldn't want to use a saw when what we need is a hammer, and vice versa. And so it's also the reminder that if and when you are bringing together organization leaders and resident leaders at the same table, it's really important that the two groups themselves also begin to appreciate the difference, so that we don't fall into a situation where the organizations start to see the resident network as an extension of their staff. And conversely, the network of neighborhood leaders don't begin to assume that the organization can function in as fluid and adaptive a way as the resident network can. They need to appreciate the strengths and limitations of each other and figure out how do they leverage the power and possibility of both so that they end up dancing well together. The other thing that is really critical, if you're thinking about engaging and inviting people to the table, is you need to realize that citizens will often speak in story, but that our systems respond to patterns and themes. And so we can unintentionally tokenize people if, because I have a very passionate story, you name me to be the citizen rep on how you're going to address poverty in your community, because I am maybe a single mom with 3 kids, and so my experience of poverty is very different. I know from even my neighbors, one of whom is a senior citizen, one of whom may be a disabled veteran, and one of whom may be a newcomer family. And it can be paralyzing to be the designated spokesperson on behalf of all poor people if all I can draw upon is my own story and experience. I will actually probably shut up because I don't want you all, as well-intentioned as you are, to design your solution solely to meet my need, because I know it won't work. It has to be broader than that, but I don't have the mechanisms to be able to tap in and represent a constituency in the same way that a delegate from an organization can speak on behalf of their organization, unless there's some structures put in place to help make that happen. Make sense? All right, so that in a nutshell is kind of what I wanted to share about community engagement. And before we move into the exercise that I want us to play, and I just wanted to take a moment or two and see if anyone had any thoughts, ideas, or questions from what's been said so far. And to do that, I guess I better open up the lines, yeah? Okay, you're all unmuted. So whether you feel comfortable to just type in the chat box any comments or questions, or whether you just like to open up and unmute yourself and share, we'd love to hear from you. People are quiet and running away. Oh no. I'll tell you what, how about I put you into the exercise now, and maybe having a chance to sort of chit chat in a small group will help you to think about things. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put you into small groups, and I want to introduce you to a tool called the empathy map. I should actually right now put into the chat box a link to this tool and I will do that. But also, here's the exercise. Imagine that you are hearing about this new collaborative effort that is just starting to form to alleviate poverty and elevate prosperity for the people of your community. Okay? What I would love you to do is have a moment of empathy with a variety of different perspectives that may have an opinion or a reaction to this opportunity. Okay? So in your small group, you're going to be assigned a perspective. and to really understand and walk in the shoes of that person. So for example, if I'm in group 1 and we are asked to have empathy for the person living in poverty, we say, wow, when that person hears about this collaborative effort to alleviate poverty and elevate prosperity, what are they seeing? What are they saying to each other? What are they doing? What are they thinking? And what are they feeling? And so in your small group, I want you to sort of brainstorm around that pretty quickly. And then after you've done that and you feel like you've got a handle on what that person's experience or reaction to the news would be, I want you to pull out the top 3 things that you think the person living in poverty would want from that collaborative effort, and what are the 3 obstacles to that person getting what they want. Okay? So 3 things they want and 3 obstacles that get in the way of them getting what they want. You will have 15 minutes. So if you're in, I'm going to put you into 4 groups. And so group 1, I want you to really hold the perspective of the person living in poverty. What are they seeing? What are they saying, doing, thinking, feeling about this opportunity that they're hearing about? What do they want? And what are the things that are going to get in the way of them getting what they want? Group 2, I want you to imagine that you're a nonprofit service provider who's been supporting people in poverty. What's your reaction to this opportunity? Group 3, you're an ordinary community resident who is sort of just Joe Q, Jane Q public, right? You don't personally experience poverty, but you've been living in this community for a long time. And lastly, if you're group 4, you are a funder or donor who is contributing to this effort. Okay? I'm going to give you all 15 minutes. 15 minutes to do this work. I'll give you a 3-minute warning when I want you to sort of shift gears and pull out the wants and desires of your respective group. Are folks clear about the instruction? Okay, I'm putting you into 4 groups. There you go.
And I did add to the chat the breakout room perspectives so folks can refer back if needed.
Beautiful, thanks so much.
Yep.
And I'm going to go in right now and I can give people
Hi, Terry.
Hi, Alan.
How are you?
Good. How are you doing today?
Good, good, good. I'll be honest, I'm not tracking this very well.
What group are you? Do you know?
I guess I'm
We're in group 3, I think it said.
Okay, so here's the exercise. The exercise is really about thinking that, oh, I think you guys are group 1. Are you group 1? No?
Well,
Okay.
There's just you and Alan and I in this particular group.
Yeah, I didn't, I think I got put back into the main.
Do you want me to send you back to group 1? Because I think that's where you were originally assigned.
Okay.
Oh, okay, thank you.
I think, and Terry, I think you're the same. You were put into group 3, you're correct.
Yes, yeah. Hi, Alan.
Hi, Terry.
Okay. I'm going to try.
Did they kick us out?
I think we're a group unto
Oh, that's good.
ourselves.
So where are you, Alan? You're not here in
Oh,
our
no,
area?
I'm in Southern California.
Oh,
Yeah. Yep. Very fortunate to be able to work remotely.
yes,
And I've
yes.
been doing that for, well, before COVID. So we moved
Oh,
down here over about a year and a half ago.
oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Are you from here?
Am I from here?
Arlington, Darrington.
Originally from Texas,
Oh,
and then we relocated to Seattle, and then to Darrington. So we're nomads,
yeah, yeah.
but I love the weather here.
Oh, yes, I bet you do.
Yeah.
So
So
you're not anywhere near fire.
we're not.
Good, good.
We're in the Greater Palm Springs area. So I certainly don't joke about fire, but as I joke to Wyoming, there's so much sand around us that there's if it caught on fire, it would just turn into a big sheet of glass. So, but no, still don't. I mean, scariest thing in the world
Yes, yes.
is to smell smoke, and where's it coming from?
Yes, yeah. Yeah, I'm in Arlington and we traveled to Oregon and many of the fires are out that were there so bad, but there are some. And so you would drive through bands of smoke. It was terrible.
It's terrifying.
Yes.
2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, we drove down just to spend a week or two in August so that we weren't shocked when we moved. And but it was during that fire season, and we stopped midway and woke up the next morning and there was ash all over our car. You couldn't go outside. So
Yeah.
it's awful.
Yeah. So close. So close. Well, I don't think she was successful in getting us to our group. I am going to do some other things. So I'm going to close out here just for a second and we'll be back with the other group, I guess.
I guess we'll see.
Okay.
Terry, did I mess up in getting you assigned to a group?
Yes.
Oh, I apologize. I kept trying to put you in. I put you in a couple of different ones trying to get you in. I so apologize.
That's okay. That's all right. That's okay.
I'm going to bring people back in 1 minute. So you'll get to hear. It's interesting. I should have gotten you to float maybe. I don't know why you wouldn't go in. Ah. That's the thing, right? When this stuff works, it really works. And when it doesn't, it doesn't.
Well, I'm very non-tech. I sympathize 100%.
Well, I'll bring everybody back to you.
Okay. Okay.
Just now.
Okay.
You're one of the quick people, Sarah, that got back really fast. I'm glad.
I don't know how that happened.
Neither do I. I sometimes think this technology is a bit of a mystery, to be honest. But there you go. Oh, welcome back. People are coming. This is good. Do we have everybody back? No. People are still slowly trickling back. There we go. Nice to see everybody's faces, though. I was able to pop into some of the groups anyway.
Thank you.
Somebody maybe got cut out. So let me see if I can bring them back in. Okay. I would love to know, group 1, there is a huge plan to do a collaborative poverty reduction initiative in your community. You are a person living in poverty. What are the 3 things that you really want from this initiative, and what's going to get in the way?
So we were in group 1 and we were not able to find the questions, so we were just focused about how we would feel for people in poverty. So I think I get resources. It will be something that they would like to learn about resources.
Okay. So they want resources. They want supports. Okay, that's one thing they want. What else do they want?
Well, the other thing is, you know, when people design the poverty reduction program, the people who never live in the poverty, they are designed the program for somebody who they think needs certain help. So if the person living in poverty should have the input, should be part of that plan.
Beautiful. Okay. That makes complete sense to me. So they want to be able to give input to the design of the strategy. They want to be able to have some resources brought their way. And what's the third thing?
Well, you know, the plan has to be owned by the people who actually living in the poverty.
They want people to understand their needs. They want people to give them, to understand where they're coming from. So they don't want somebody in there that's not gonna know exactly what they're feeling or what their needs are real.
Well,
Fantastic.
We already know a lot of program design out there and fail. So, you know, you truly want to you know, provide a program and reduction poverty, like the governor talking about by the year, whatever it is, he wants 50% of people in poverty is no longer in poverty. But, you know, you don't bring the people who have master degree or whatever and talking about the people living in poverty. You bring the people living in poverty and work side by side with the people who put in the plan together. But the reality.
Fantastic. Okay, what's going to get in the way of them being able to do that?
Well, because we don't do outreach, we don't do the right outreach to bring in the right person and bring the right person in the table.
Fantastic. Thank you, Group 1. Group 2, you're a nonprofit service provider. What do you want from this poverty reduction initiative, and what's going to get in your way?
I think one of the things, we didn't actually discuss that piece of it, but from what everyone has said, what I think we want is to be able to join in with a lot of other organizations to be able to decide what is needed. And that group would include parents or people who are in that particular situation. So we'd want to be part of a team of people who could work around the needs and wants of those particular families.
Did you touch at all on things that would make that difficult for you or would get in the way of you being able to be part of that design?
I'm speaking for myself because we didn't discuss it, but certainly time is an issue. Time and resources, the ability to be able to spend the time making those meetings and making that a priority in your work as a nonprofit, because one of the things, there's a lot of barriers and there's a lot of problems. There's a lot of barriers when you're working with people on a nonprofit, and some of that is just finding the funding, the time and the resources to be able to employ the right people and enough people to be able to do the work.
Fantastic. And I really liked what you say, which is they really want to understand that it's designed based on what's needed and where the gaps are, like that there's a real sense of what that whole kind of network might look like before we dive in and create a new solution. Group 3, community resident. You're like Joe and Jane Q. Public. You're hearing about this poverty reduction thing that's coming to your community. What are you thinking, feeling? What do you want? And what's going to get in the way?
Well, I can tell you right now, I'm worried about my property value right now. There's a project coming up that's going to be moved into my neighborhood that's going to be for homeless families, and it's going to take care of those homeless families. But first thing I'm worried about is my house is going to be worth less. And then bringing all these people into my neighborhood, leaves me in a position, where there's a whole lot more traffic and a whole lot more people there. So I don't want that to happen either. And even worse, it's those people who they're moving in here.
Whoever those people are, got it. And so the barriers, what's getting in the way of them getting what they need? So they want their property values to be retained. They want some say in who all's there. And what else, do you think?
Well, basically, it's an open field now and our kids play there. We don't want this to happen at all. So those are all the issues that the community has in our scenario. Obstacles to that is information and trust that, in fact, in most other areas in the country, these kind of things don't reduce property values. And information and understanding that with good calming measures and moving the entrance to our location and our building place to a different location away from where the families are who are most concerned, closer to the main arterial, and also getting a chance to find out who these others are all parts of the ways that you can build empathy into what we're looking for.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Group 4, the donors. What are your thoughts when you hear about this, and what do you need? What's going to get in the way? What do you hope for, and what's going to get in the way, Group 4?
I'll start, but Mary, back in. Go, Charles.
Go. No.
Well, one of the things we talked about was just need for clarity about who we're helping and what kind of data we're even using to identify who the members are of the community we're working with. What counts for them as a participant. And then the use of maybe qualitative data as well, like hearing about their stories. And if we get the project off the ground, we really want to record some of those stories from the very beginning of how they come through the door to how they exit, and hopefully have some good outcomes.
Fantastic. What's going to get in the way of you getting those things? Did you talk about that at all?
We talked a little bit about, not that much, but a little bit about just how some parameters that are out there are not that useful, like the federal poverty level doesn't capture everyone who's struggling, or you know, the different, I guess the cost of living for somebody who's at the lower end of the income might be somewhat higher actually than it is for someone who pays less in daily taxes. But we didn't get a lot into that.
That's okay. What I really wanted you to experience, which it sounds like the groups have done beautifully, is to really understand that when you're launching a big initiative like this, there are different groups that all feel passionate and feel like they have a stake in what's happening. And so taking the time to really think and get to know and understand and communicate across the network the different needs that different folks have, and getting out of the way and creating those opportunities where they're not those people, but, you know, relationships can be built. One of the best stories I ever heard was a facilitator called in to a very intense land use planning decision that had to do with creating a home for folks in poverty and in struggle. Was the facilitator went in and asked them to imagine it was their mom or their brother or their sister, and what would they want. And when you shifted it that way and moved them solely out of their heads into their hearts, there was an ability people had to look at it differently. But I think as a tool, this is a really useful tool, not only for a planning team to imagine and anticipate, you know, the different needs from different stakeholders that you might need to consider and attend to in the design and implementation of whatever your work may be. Any comments or questions about this as a tool and or engagement, just as a taste? Well, if not, I know we're coming close to the end of our time. So if you wouldn't mind, by way of a summary, offering in the chat box one word or one phrase that's kind of sticking with you as you think about this topic that we've been exploring together around engagement. I would love to hear where you're at, because that will also help shape when we do our deep dive thinking and planning. All right. I think I'm going to pass it over to you, Elise. There might...
Yeah, while people are typing, excuse me, I need to drink more water today. While people are typing in the chat box, I'll go ahead and just remind folks that October 13th, which is the Tuesday 2 weeks from now, is our next learning webinar, and that's on mobilizing collaborative leadership. So hope to see you there. I will be sending out the recording of this webinar along with a PDF of the slides as well. And
the tool I can send you if I have. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, we'll make sure that we get the empathy map tool in there as well. And then I would just encourage you all to, you know, for those of you who are here from a collaborative, to really think about, you know, what you feel like might be helpful to your collaborative and what you might want to take back and share with the group, and how you can apply that. So Lark and Molly and I from the United Way team are happy to help be a thought partner in that, and thinking through, you know, how can we apply these things to you know, build our collaboratives into even stronger groups working on these various issues. So yeah, with that, thank you all for joining us. and look forward to seeing you on October 13th.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.